Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Duru, and I have the pleasure of talking to an old friend and colleague, Phylis Savari. She is the author of Data for Joy, Restoring Balance in the Age of Algorithms. And I was so inspired by this book, I insisted with Phylis that we had to talk about this book and get more information about what she wrote, what she was thinking, and also just to give you, the dear reader and dear viewer, more insight into why this book is so necessary and so timely for these times. So Phylis, again, thank you for agreeing to this interview.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes. So how are you doing?
I'm doing great today, and how about you?
I'm doing good.
Good.
All right. So let's just dive right into it, okay?
Okay, let's do it.
Yes, the classic question of any interviewer is, what motivated you to write Data for Joy, and what did you hope to accomplish?
Okay. Well, actually, so I felt like there was some purpose I was supposed to be doing, but I didn't know what it was. So I ended up taking a mentoring program, and that program is supposed to help people like me get clarity on what it is that they might be able to contribute based on the experience in their life. So we shared a lot of experiences, and afterwards one of the teachers said to me, you know, you should write a book about the experiences you've had in the tech industry, and we think it'll be really helpful. So when she said it, it automatically felt like, okay, this is the right thing I'm supposed to be doing, even though I've never written a book, I don't know anything about it, but I knew it was the right thing. And then once I started writing it, what I wanted to accomplish is to take a lot of different pieces of Silicon Valley and connect the dots for people on a lot of different moving parts, so that as consumers or creators of technology products, they can be more empowered to make healthy choices.
Right.
And so this way, if they understand where their technology products are coming from, then they can make better decisions.
So it's almost like there was a calling.
Yes.
And you answered the call.
Yeah, that's it. And I knew there was a call, but I couldn't hear exactly what the call was. And then I got that clarity from someone else. And sometimes it helps to hear what another person sees in you.
Sure.
Because once you're in it, you don't realize what unique thing you have to offer, because for you it's just natural. So it sometimes helps to get a mentor to guide you through something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So based on that, I think I know the answer to this question, but how did you feel after writing this book?
I mean, I felt so fulfilled. I did feel like, wow, I'm doing something that is so meaningful, and this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and it comes with a sense of purpose and fulfillment, I felt incredibly fulfilled, but also relieved, because I'm not a writer. So I've worked 30 years in corporate America writing bullet points, and then suddenly I had to write 50,000 words of prose. So it was a big leap for me. Right. At first I was tired, and I would have to take a lot of naps, but then I really got into it. So now I actually feel like I found my stride and what I'm supposed to be doing in the world. It feels great. Yeah,
and for any big achievement and big work, it's important to find that stride and to find out what are the things that work for you to get you into that flow. So take the rest that you need.
Yes.
Right? Find the ways to get the focus and that kind of thing. So I think that's an important lesson as well
Yeah,
for folks
the
here.
beginning, the book definitely started more slowly at the beginning.
Of course,
and I was like, at this rate, it's going to take me 10 years to write this. But then it really started to pick up. So especially when I started writing about my personal experience, then it just flowed out of me. And the beginning of the book is more, it's the history more of the web and Silicon Valley. So that part, because you really want to get all your facts straight and everything, it was a more technical exercise. It took some time.
Yeah, and I'll ask a little bit about that journey, because it's a fascinating journey that you take us on through Silicon Valley's history. Before we get there, I want to find out, what kind of feedback are you getting? Is it validating sort of the feelings that you have about writing the book?
Yeah, so a big problem I had in the tech industry is I feel like I'm suffering, but I'm suffering alone. And I look around and everyone else looks fine, and I'm like, is it me? Is there a problem with me? And I spent a lot of years thinking there's a problem with me, and I'm suffering alone. And when I wrote this book, I can't tell you how many people contacted me
Like
to
me.
say, it's like, oh my God, I can relate to everything you're saying. And now they could finally have a chance to talk about it with someone, that, you have to carry that around silently inside, and it
Sure.
kind of stays with you. And a number of people said to me, I think I have PTSD
Wow.
from my experience in my career. And I actually never mentioned PTSD in the book, but a number of people independently said that to me. That's what came up for them.
That's amazing.
And, and now they can finally talk about it, and it validates them
Sure.
too, and it's from people, like some people, it was someone who would sit in my row that I never had a conversation with, and suddenly they're like, let's talk about that time, in that group we were in. And so it's been cathartic for so many of us to just find each other after all these years to just talk about what we went through.
Right, right.
Yeah.
What a journey. So this is a great segue into this part. So you describe yourself on a journey of sort of this self-discovery. And I'm wondering, again, what have you discovered about yourself in this journey, in writing the book? And, have you reached a destination, or is this journey ongoing?
Right. Yeah. So for myself, I discovered how resilient I am, much more resilient than I thought.
Because you can see it once you put it down on paper, you say, wow, I really did that, right?
Yeah, that's it. It's like there were so many hurdles where I was like, I can't make it past this one. This is the last thing I can do. I can't go anymore.
Yeah.
And then I made it past each and every one. And I didn't expect myself to get as far as I did in my career, and to stick it out for as long as I did. So I feel like, okay, I'm resilient, and now it's also because in our careers we have so much uncertainty from one day to the next, if we're even going to have our job, if they're going to just let us go. There's no job security. And so now I'm comfortable with that uncertainty. At the beginning it was frightening, and you're just like, I don't know, every day I come in, I could be gone, you don't know. And so it's that's a cloud hanging over you, and now I'm not worried. I just go in, and I know it'll be okay no matter what happens. So I trust in the universe a little more. I trust in my own judgment more, because the other struggle I had in the book that I talk about a lot is like when to leave the job, and my intuition would tell me one thing, but I would try to power through, and now I trust myself more, my own judgment. So I feel a lot more confident in myself and how to navigate the world that we're in now.
Yeah, and I've read about that too. Like there's there's actually a value in quitting.
Yes.
Like sometimes we overemphasize this legend or the myth of the person who just wouldn't give up, wouldn't quit, just stubbornly push through until their last dying breath to do something. And actually sometimes it's good to quit and draw boundaries and move on, for instance, or find a place to restore before you move on to the next thing. So that's very valuable.
Yeah, and especially the generation previous to us, and at the beginning of our career, there was that belief, that you need to stick with your job for your entire career, or that expectation.
Wouldn't that be nice now to have a job for our entire life?
I know, and so somehow, you're putting that expectation on yourself, like, oh, I'm supposed to make this work, and it's up to me to make this work, and I have to make this work. There has to be a way. So you're trying to push through and stay because you feel like that's what you're supposed to do. But now in this world, it's okay. It's okay to be fluid and dynamic. So yeah.
And that means, of course, that there's a life cycle that we go through, right? It's not just you have a job, you do your job, and you retire and die.
Right.
There's actually these entries, and then you reach a peak, and you may exit, and so up and down and up and down it goes. And your book is, of course, full of those kind of journeys. And you describe like the initial excitement of getting a new job, and then you're working away, and then reality starts to seep in, and then suddenly it's like, oh no, what have I done? How do I get out of this? So, and then also the book made it clear that some of these experiences also impacted your mental health because maybe sometimes you weren't prepared for, because it's hard to adjust from that initial euphoria of thinking you finally found the job, right? And of course, you start a job thinking it meets all of these great criteria, and then as each one starts to fall or other things come along, it starts impacting. So anyway, so the question I have for you is, what advice would you give readers about what to consider when confronting these life cycles of employment. I mean, looking back, there's so many lessons, of course. Maybe you could pick one or two key ones from these journeys.
Yeah. So the most important one for me was that if a job is starting to affect my mental health, that I really do need to walk away. So I have situations in the book where I am struggling, there's a lot of signs, like I'll have crippling headaches or I have uncontrollable tears. That's a pretty big sign,
that's
right?
A big one.
Like, okay,
that's
like
a big
you can't
one for
stop
sure.
crying or something, right? And just having to talk myself into just going to the job, getting out of the car, walking to my cubicle, every single step is like that painful. And I'm still like, oh, I need to stay. so that I really just have to listen. And so with that particular example where I tried to push through, I mean, it took me months to recover after I finally left. And so that's the number one most important thing. Like if your mental health is being sacrificed, it usually is better in the long run if you just take care of your mental health and whatever you need to do that, and then you'll end up with a better next job and you'll get there faster and everything. So that's number one. And the second one is to trust your inner guidance. So my inner guidance sometimes is like, hey, this place is going down. This place is going down, right? And I've had every job ended up like that, right? So this place is going down. And sometimes it's like, oh, it seems it has the potential to come back. And, maybe I should just see if it changes or not. But I've already known that it's going down. And so every single time I've waited after that, the place has gone down, right? I mean, I didn't need to stay and witness it to prove to myself that my intuition is right. So there's some part of it where I wasn't trusting that, because from the outside it looks illogical maybe, but this is what's right for me. And so to develop that sense of what's right for me when I'm navigating this, so for everyone it's going to be different, and so they need to know that. And then the last thing I'll throw in, because I feel like this is an important one, is with Eckhart Tolle. He has some great guidance. Like if you're in a situation that makes you unhappy, you have three choices. You can either leave it or change it, or if you can change it, you can try to change it. It may not change, or accept it, but accept it really fully. Like, okay, I'm all right with this. I'm going to just stay. And so there's this sense of like quiet quitting a job that people have in the industry where like, okay, I don't want to be here anymore, but I need the paycheck. So I'm just going to stay and just give them the bare minimum while I look for another job. And I've tried that, and it doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't feel in integrity. And it also lets your teammates down and the people around you. And usually that's not who I'm having the problem with. That's not why I'm leaving. I'm usually leaving for some bigger reason. So what ends up working better for me is like if I choose that I'm going to stay because I need the money, I just fully commit. I still give it my all. And then either I leave or I have found another job, but then I'll perform better at the job interviews and stuff because I'm in my integrity. So I don't like the quiet quitting. That hasn't worked for me. But yeah, I like with Eckhart Tolle, it's very definitive and empowering where you make your choice and really go all in behind it.
Yeah, and I think that helps you feel your authentic self.
Yes.
I really like that framework because it means that everything that you're doing, you're being true to who you are, your values. You don't feel so much conflict, right?
Right.
Because, just the notion of quiet quitting, it's kind of like a slacker kind of mentality, but of course you're not going to think of yourself as a slacker.
Right. You think of yourself as victimized, right?
Right, exactly. So I like this framework to just have more surety or certainty in terms of your, sent to you in terms of your own values.
Yeah.
And applying that in whatever you do, wherever you are.
Yeah, that's it.
I like that.
Yeah.
So, so speaking of careers, now you had quite a career arc at Yahoo.
Yeah, right.
Where I first met you, of course. So if you could just give the audience a little flavor of that. There's a lot there, of course, so you can't go through it all.
Right.
Please buy the book to read it. It's fascinating Silicon Valley history. But if you could just give some key highlights of things that you learned in that career arc, because I felt like there were it was a multifaceted experience.
Yes. So part of it, and I'll preface it with like Duru was my last boss at Yahoo.
Guilty as charged.
I know I didn't leave because of Duru, but yeah, the story's in the book why I left. But so I was there for 7 years, and because there were several CEOs during the time, so many different reorganizations, I kept getting moved from one group to the other group, and things that seemed so unlikely, like I had moved from an engineering team to the marketing team, and I was in the Yahoo Media group, and just all different kinds of groups. And the very last group I was in as a data person was the data team. It was not the first, it was not in the middle, it was the last team. So I was everywhere but the data team.
Imagine that.
And the thing about it that was great, actually, that I wish was a norm in most places is that as data analysts, we not only have to be experts in the data, but we have to be experts in the business to understand how to apply the data
talk about that a lot.
to help the business succeed. And so by going from group to group, what I saw is every group had a different set of success metrics, and sometimes at odds with each other, which was fascinating in itself. But then also just, that idea of, am I in a centralized data team versus part of the business, and to have spent time in both, that's where I felt like I had a complete knowledge of what I had to have in order to be a successful data analyst. So I feel like that idea of rotating positions every year is great. I feel like that should be normal instead of part of a dysfunctional byproduct. But it just turned out to be a great experience for me as a data analyst. So I think that's a great recommendation. The other thing Yahoo did that was wonderful is they gave us 20% of our time, like 1 day a week, to do our own exploration. And the reason that was great is because sometimes the business doesn't even know what data we have, right? So we're not realizing the full potential of the data if we leave it to the business to say, oh, can you use data to solve this problem or that problem? Sometimes we know the data and we know them, and we say, hey, look, based on what I see, we can use data to help you do this thing you never thought was possible because you didn't know the data existed, you know? So giving the data analysts that empowerment to add the value is fun for the data analysts. It makes them want to do their job more and the undesirable parts of their job more as well. So there are lots of great things, about Yahoo, even though it was completely chaotic and dysfunctional, right?
Made us tougher, I like to think. Yeah, that's such a good point you made there, because when, the last group I was in marketing, and I would go through several cycles of conversations where I realized that the folks in the marketing team didn't know the full range of data that we had access to. And I think it culminated in finally creating a very plain English kind of dictionary, data dictionary, so to speak. Here's the data, plain language description of it, here's how potentially it can be used in marketing. And I think that helped a lot of folks, really understand, connect the dots better between data and the insights that they're trying to get to.
Yeah, we have to do that translation for them. That's part of our job, even though it's never in the description. So that's part of the job.
Support. Yeah. So now you end up at GoPro. Now GoPro seemed to have a similar trajectory, but it's a very compressed time frame. So could you again just one or two things just describe to us like what initially excited you about it, and then what kind of went wrong, and how could they have done better? Because of course they had a very rapid rise and then rapid collapse. If you just check out the stock, that tells the whole story right there.
Yes. So for me, I loved the product. So I, at the time, was riding motorcycles with my best friend. I was just learning how to ride.
Oh, wow.
And, and he said, okay, let's go get some GoPros and, start taking footage. And I loved doing it. And the office moved 2 doors away from where my best friend lived, right? So he's like, oh my God, they're right there. So I walked into the office and,
That's amazing.
It's like the inventor, Nick Woodman, he was a surfer and he lived nearby and, and he invented this amazing product that I was enjoying. And so having those connections, I really wanted to go work for them, and so they went public in 2014, and I joined them the beginning of 2015. So I'm like, great,
So
they're
right
on
at
this
the
high,
peak of excitement about GoPro. I remember those days.
Yeah, and so super excited. I had a fantastic time, and it was a fantastic team. So they were making that transition of being from a startup to a public company, and I think that was a problem because they didn't have that experience. So sometimes when you're an innovator, it doesn't always translate to having that experience and knowledge you need to run a public company and answering to shareholders and setting expectations, because when you're a startup and you're privately funded, you have more freedom to do things your own way in a way that may not work out for shareholders.
Yeah.
So one thing that was the biggest problem, I would say, is that once they started declining in the demand for action cameras, they tried to overcompensate and promise way too much. They made goals that were really unrealistic, and we're going to make several new products in 1 year, and it just wasn't realistic. And so we were setting ourselves up to disappoint the shareholders, the consumers, the employees, and everyone. So nobody won, and it went down a lot in 2015, the stock. But then nobody learned from those mistakes, and they did the same thing again, right? So I think that part of not learning from your mistakes, they also really undervalued the data team specifically. And so we all ended up, most of us quit in a very short amount of time and just left because we weren't getting the resources we needed and asked for. And other teams even advocated for us, and we were not getting what we needed. So I think it was just that lack of self-reflection and learning from your mistakes, and accepting that you can't ride the high numbers forever. It's a tough one. It's like you want it to last longer, but sometimes it doesn't. So it's a tough one.
It's tough. And when I hear you say learn from your mistakes, I hear again the Data for Joy framework, because learning from your mistakes requires you to be observant, to record data in some form. It may be visual, it may be mental, it may be in numbers, but record data, analyze it, and then come to some conclusions based on the data as you understand it.
Right.
And also, of course, have a sound model or framework for analyzing that.
Yes.
Would you say that the Data for Joy framework could have at least helped extend?
Yes. Yeah, I do, because it's just like with all our data jobs, right? We gather the data, we try something, we gather the data, we look at it, and then we try to learn from it and do something differently so we get closer to what we're aiming for.
Exactly.
And that data can help us achieve things more quickly, and they can be good things, so that's the point, using the data for everyone to win together, right, and have a good experience. And so, the CEO wasn't looking at data reports, so he was really proud of using his intuition.
Right.
And
He
the
had
thing
a strong
is,
intuition.
yes,
strong intuitive feel.
Yes, and I actually loved that about him, because I felt like the tech companies were sometimes just too data focused, and I'm like, this person can show us that intuition can get you places, but then he only used intuition, right? And the
Again,
other
finding balance. That's the theme of your book, finding the balance.
Yes. So the other companies were only using data and not their intuition, and he's only using intuition. And I feel like you have to weigh both of them. You just have to kind of weigh both of them, take both as inputs, and then make your decisions from there. And with some looking at the hard truth. It can be hard. It can be hard to look at data that is not flattering, and that is difficult. And at Yahoo, we had that experience too. It was on a decline, so we sometimes didn't have good news to deliver, and then to have to look at that and say, well, how can we make the best of this, right? So they could have done more than that. And Yahoo's decline was very gradual. They did a better job. They were data-driven. So there's something to learn from that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to relationships, because another common current throughout the book is relationships. Sometimes they're strengthening, sometimes they were draining. And of course, you talked very vividly sometimes about the relationships you found yourself in, whether it was at work or in your personal life or with your family. And I'm just curious, in a data book, what are the kind of the messages you want people to get out of so much vivid descriptions about the relationships you were running into?
Yeah, so I included the relationships just to, for a few reasons. So first, like in just regular life, like outside of social media and everything, we all have our own internal algorithm or judgment on like, okay, this is who I want to spend more time with or less time with. We make that analysis for ourselves, but in the tech products like social media, they're the ones suggesting who you should be spending more time with, and the criteria.
So true. And sometimes we don't even notice, right?
Right. It's so seamlessly embedded in the experience, right? And so and their criteria is to maximize your engagement. So I wanted to illustrate that some of the most engaging relationships I was in were the most toxic. That tends to be, so there's some aspect of the quality of a relationship. Not all relationships have the same quality, but so something can be highly engaging and a low quality. And so, consumers really need to get clear with themselves on what they want out of their relationships and their interactions, and whether the social media algorithms are aligned with that, and so, we need to start figuring this out a little bit more for ourselves, like what are we looking for and how can I navigate that through these products. And so that was part of it. I just wanted to also say that the people building the social media platforms, the top ones are all in Silicon Valley, and this is the setting. Is like a lot of extreme relationships, transactional relationships, self-serving relationships compared to other places I've lived or visited. This area has that quality in those relationships, and then that's reflected in work, produced, and then that's amplified to the whole world through the products, right? So it's important for people to understand the environment that these products are being built in, and the setting of what we're trying to transmit to the rest of the world.
And it's interesting to hear you say that, because I certainly don't spend much time thinking about the environment in which the people who are producing things are working. Like, we could think of sweatshops and those kinds of like really physical environments, but we never think about an environment for people who are doing data and coding. But the environment will be reflected in their products as well.
Right.
Yeah, it's
fascinating. If you don't know what a healthy relationship is, then how can you put it in a model like you don't have that knowledge? Yeah. Right? So I really feel like...
Or even notice when your model's not working well or not interpreting the data well, right?
Right. And none of those things are a requirement for having the job, right? Anyway, it's just something to think about, right? Yeah.
Okay. Well, cool. So you also described some personal experiences that people might find perplexing, just kind of observing it as an outsider. I won't go through all of the different ones. Again, read the book. They're all there. But I wanted to know whether there's an underlying message here about using behavioral observations as data, because you do go, again, vivid descriptions, like vivid descriptions of relationships, but also you had vivid descriptions of people's behaviors, and you were making assessments and conclusions. So what messages are you trying to convey to the reader in those cases?
Yeah, so for me, I was in a few complex or undesirable relationships, that was
complex, and sometimes that's like a euphemism or understatement.
And they were kind of thrust on me, right? And so gathering data about what's going on and the dynamics of it, it helps you frame, how do I manage the situation? How do I handle the situation to minimize my own pain or whatever? And, actually unwittingly or unintentionally, it still kind of comes back to Eckhart Tolle's advice of, either change it or leave it or accept it. And a lot of times in a relationship, you can't change it. You can't change someone else. You can only change yourself. So then you're like, okay, I have to leave it or accept it. And so yeah, it gives you that clarity on what are my options for managing this, and then it also just makes it feel a little more like problem solving instead of being lost in a hopeless situation.
Yeah.
So you feel a little more empowerment and control when you can just say, okay, this is what's happening, and I'm looking at it objectively and trying to problem solve. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that again, like I said, both in the relationships and then your very detailed description of people's behavior, that kind of took me by surprise, you know, in a book about data for joy, because again, I didn't expect the whole human person element. So that really brought some extra richness to the lessons you're trying to teach the readers.
Part of it is like emotions are on a spectrum,
of course,
from like grief to joy, you know, and so we're always trying to move the needle like toward joy. And so so even in our personal lives, we can gather data around us, and then it makes it more natural to do it, like when you're on social media, like, oh, do I really want to engage with this, you know, comment that I see or this post I see, and it just, then suddenly the lines are all, you know, blurred, and then it's just more natural to take charge of your situation instead of being guided by whatever's being put in front of you.
Right. Be conscious.
Be conscious.
Yeah. And if you think of yourself as a data collector, data analyzer, you have to remain conscious. Right? You can't really do that. Or at least I've never been able to analyze data unconsciously.
Right. You have to be watching it.
You have to be observant and discerning. Okay, cool. So we're both data analytics, or we're data professionals, as I like to say. So let's talk about some things about the lessons in the book for data professionals specifically. There are several episodes in the book where you use Google to search for information. We won't tell our Yahoo friends about that. But would you describe these inquiries that you described in the book as data for joy? Like, how do you place data for joy in this AI era, right? Because search is now moving from the suggested links to now the summaries. Like the engine just tells us what it is that we think we want to know, right? We don't even go searching for it. It just is all put there. So yeah, I'd like to get your perspective on all of this.
Yeah, so I mean, the way I look at it, like, so first just the search part before the AI is that, you know, if I'm trying to problem solve something, and there's some data I think I can find on the internet that I don't have about a topic, I'll go and do a search, but I really look at the source. I mean, I really, you know, I don't try to take information so much from blogs or people I don't know, and opinions. I mean, if I want an opinion, I can. Like, sometimes it's nice to go to Reddit and just see like a juicy thread. And
I just recently got into Reddit. I found some good nuggets in there.
Yeah, that's what, sometimes it's like, actually, it feels good because you're like, all right, I'm not the only one who's going, you know, feeling this or whatever. So it's kind of nice. But it's like, okay, I'm trying to problem solve, and I just need reference material more. You know, I can go there and I look at the source, and then I get more information, and it helps me make my decisions, and I can feel good about it. Like I'm getting help, and it's bringing me closer to joy. Now with the AI, I do like that, even though at Google they give you that AI summary at the top, but they do list the sources at the bottom. I really like that they do that, because then you can look at the sources and say, okay, do I know this or not know this, and just give your own judgment on the sources. And then they even highlight it inside. You can open it up and just, you know, evaluate for yourself, like, is this summary like what I would have taken out of these articles? So I do like that they provide that to you, but it takes the extra work. But then you can start to get your own feel, like, is this summary something I can take literally or just directional? And so it does save time. You know, it's actually okay. I think it can save time and be helpful toward, you know, helping you achieve whatever makes you happier. So I actually like it. Yeah, it's good.
All right. Yeah, we'll see how, you know, the tech giants go from here. In terms of improving the product. So now both of us have been in the profession for a very long time. We've seen an amazing trajectory all the way from when the title data analytics or data science didn't even exist. To now there's all sorts of titles. There's analytics engineers, there's data engineers, and on it goes. Now, what do you think we've missed in this trajectory so far in terms of the ethical dilemmas, for instance, that you describe in the book, Data for Joy? Like, where do we go from here?
Okay, I mean, so the first thing, which is bigger than the data industry itself, is that there's no real consequences for organizations who prioritize profit over ethics.
Yeah.
And that's just the number one problem. But I do feel hopeful that there can be some change to that. So right now there is a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit against Facebook from 41 states and Washington, D.C. about them engineering their algorithms to make the content more addictive, and that it affects the mental health of teenagers. This is what the lawsuit is about. And so I feel like maybe what can come out of this is some checks and balances that are needed in order to, do the ethical thing and the right thing and the thing we all know is true, that these are harmful. These can be harmful. They can also be helpful products, but these can be harmful products, and they have to be managed as such. And so I think now there will be some of that accountability. But until then, one thing our industry can do is I've read in places where maybe data professionals should take an oath of ethics, like a Hippocratic oath, like doctors take, and that we should step up and just say, hey, we commit to acting out of integrity, and that this is just part of the job, right? And we don't have that. I mean, I've never been at an interview where anyone asked for my ethics or what I would do in situations with data. Like, I've never even come up, We don't even talk about it. I mean, it's not part of the job description. It's not part of the job content. And so I feel like we, as an industry, can step that up and say, hey, we take a pledge to uphold certain ethical values. So yeah, I would say those are a couple of the things that come up.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to hear you point that out, because so many of us in the data profession, we have access to such valuable telling data, right? And we want everyone in the profession to be ethical in their use of it and the application of it. So yeah, that's a good call out.
Yeah, like one more thing I'll add is there's also this blind spot that maybe, data work is just a technical job, like we've been talking about, where there is some humanity that has to come into it. So I was taking this course from MIT. It was a management course instead of an engineering course, which I think it should have been an engineering course. But the purpose of the class was like, you really need to talk to people when you're building technology, because you can have some undesirable outcomes. And, it gave this example of like a Las Vegas casino that was trying to streamline ordering drinks at the slot machines. And they said, let's build the drink ordering into the slot machine instead of having the cocktail waitress come. And what happened is,
Sorry, I can't help but laugh when I hear this.
No, it's really, it's a great example. I mean, it's like, because you're like, oh, that sounds good, right? Hey, just order from the machine. But then after it was too late, they discovered that the cocktail waitresses told them, like, hey, after someone orders a drink, they often get up and walk to a different machine, right? And then the cocktail waitress visually knows who to look for, but now you've lost that information.
You have no idea.
Right? And then the cocktail waitress also assesses, like, if someone's had too much to drink and maybe cuts them off or delays how long it is before they get their next drink or something like that. And they're managing all of that stuff. And this ordering system doesn't consider any of that, right? And so that needs to be part of our education in the data majors, like how humanity needs to be embedded into the models that we build.
Right, particularly in the AI area, we're talking about human in the loop.
Yeah.
We see this in your example here. Remember, the human in the loop has some value, right? The things that we're just not going to be able to engineer our way out of.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And maybe sometimes people are just going to discover it by these kinds of oops moments,
right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, we had this idea that seemed so great. Why didn't we think of doing this before? And then you're like, oh, okay. Oops.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so now on the algorithm side, so another thing, so many fascinating things in the book, but you described, so you were there kind of right at the beginning of when we were going from human curation of content and finding content to more algorithmic approaches.
Yes.
You were there.
Yeah.
Right when it was starting, when we were making that transition, and you had an amazing metaphor that I want you to share with the readers and describe why it is you thought that metaphor was an appropriate way of describing this whole process of algorithmic content discovery. Yeah.
So what came up for me, because I had this project like in the year 2000, you know, to
2000,
yeah,
oh my goodness.
so 24 years ago, to create an algorithm to suggest content for the homepage of the website of the company I was working for, based on past activity that a user had, and at that time, an editor could see what my algorithm was suggesting, but they could override it. So it's just an input for them, but it doesn't just make the final decision. But what came up for me is that it was a metaphor with food, and like there's, you know, our food pipeline, because I was working on a data pipeline, and, you know, we would collect the data and we would process the data, and there was a lot of steps that was identical to like growing food on a farm and then processing it and then putting it all together to create food for people. And so so I think of it as like this big buffet, you know, like where when content is being selected, so like let's say you go to YouTube and there's billions of videos, right, that they could put on your feed, and they're literally feeding you, right? It's a feed. So there's billions of videos.
That's right. The
right?
word.
Yeah.
This is very purposeful.
Right. You know, so it's like there's billions of videos. So this algorithm will decide which ones it's showing you and how to rank them. And so the people creating the different videos, I guess it's the channels, right? So these different channels, there's like 100 million plus channels, and they're all contributing to this big potluck, you know, this giant worldwide potluck, you know, and so how confident would you be, like, if you were served a potluck, but you had no idea who cooked your food? Like, you have no idea who made this, you know, if it's an unknown source, would you feel confident eating the food? And then how would you feel knowing, like, this potluck has been curated for you just to maximize how much you eat? You know, it's like, or just want to make sure you eat the maximum amount. Like, would you want to go to that potluck? I mean, right? And so that keeps coming up for me, where as a culture, we have a good sense of like the physical food we consume, like what's healthy, what's not healthy, how much should I eat of something, what should I eat? But in terms of mental consumption, we're not there. And we need to start making those same guidelines for ourselves, like how much should we be consuming, like what kinds of things should I be taking in, what does it look like, you know, what is a healthy portion size, right? And so those parallels, we have it really well covered, I think. You know, people have all kinds of good sense, like whether it's calorie counting or points or, you know, whatever, however they do it. Everyone has their own system, different kinds of diets, like a Mediterranean diet. What's the Mediterranean diet, right, on YouTube? I don't know, right? So we need to start curating, like, and having different styles and things that people try out. You know, instead of like, I just want you to eat the most possible, right? You know, like, I think it's just too much, you know? And this is the idea that people who can be bad actors are mixed in with experts in their field and side by side, you know? So you have to have that sense of like, who is the source? Always, who is the source?
Yeah. So the next thing I want to ask you about is storytelling. So that comes up. I think you called it interpretive storytelling, came up in the book. And there are ways, there's moments in the book where storytelling was effective, and other ways where people had the unexpected or reverse reaction that you would expect from a good story.
Right.
So maybe you could just discuss with us really quickly, what are the limits? What are the benefits, the upside, and what are some of the limits to storytelling from a data professional's, you know, point of view?
So with the storytelling, a lot does depend on your audience, and you don't always have the luxury of knowing your audience, and you might be talking to a room full of people, you don't know them. So ideally you would know who they are, and you want to kind of meet them where they are and stuff, but you don't know. And so first of all, some people aren't even interested. They're not even open to listening to your story. And we all know people like that in our life and at work, where it doesn't matter what you tell them, it can help them, but they're not available. They're not going to listen. They're just going to do whatever they were going to do, even if it's harmful to them. And but they're fine. You know, you have to accept that there's some level of like, you're not going to have power over, you know, your story won't help some people, it won't reach some people, but then some people listen. But there's this confirmation bias, you know, like a lot of times if there's a topic and we know a certain amount about a topic, we might have certain beliefs on a topic, and we're listening through that filter, So if what your story is saying is so far from this filter, it just may, be discarded, but sometimes it can be discredited too, right? There's that fine line of like, oh, your thing is so different from mine, and so you don't know what you're doing. So that does.
And you experience, or you describe that experience in the book.
Yeah. So there's that too, But I mean, imagine if you walked into a room and had to give a political speech and you didn't know what party who was what.
Can you imagine?
I mean, and that's it. Like, you can't make one story that'll fit everyone's
Sure.
perceptions. Like, it just doesn't often happen, right? So so those are some of the problems. Like, you really have to know your audience, and then there's those ethical dilemmas of like, if it's a really inconvenient truth that you're finding out, like your story is like revealing something unflattering, then you have this dilemma where sometimes you could end up getting fired. There's this example like in Google of Dr. Timid Gebru, and she was the co-leader of the AI ethics team. And, she was pointing out some things about the hiring process at Google that weren't flattering, and she ended up getting fired. But she was in an ethics team, so you think like, okay, the company is behind her to be able to listen to what she had to say. And sometimes if it's not flattering, you have to make that choice. Like, am I going to say the truth, or am I going to go with my job security?
Yeah.
And so it's a tough spot to be in as a storyteller, because you can be attacked.
Right, yeah. And this, again, refers right back to the framework you were talking about earlier, that I was saying is a good way of centering yourself in your values in everything that you do. It applies in this case as well. Right.
Yeah. So she spoke up, and which I think is great, but then, there was a consequence for her, right? Which is not what you would ideally think should have happened, right?
It would be great to talk to her and see if she feels at least validated and satisfied that she did what she felt like she had to do for her values.
Right.
Yeah. Great. So when you talk about storytelling and talking about entering a room and you don't know anybody and thinking about trying to feel the room and feel the energies. So let's talk about energies.
Okay, yes.
Because again, that's another theme that's flowing through your book. When I joined Yahoo, it was right towards the end of Carol Bartz's tenure as CEO, and you describe her in ways that people would typically think of as having masculine energy, but you're also advocating for having more balance, which is also having the feminine energy, and then you contrast her leadership style with Marissa Meyer's later on. And then what kind of energy she had. So I'm wondering again, how would you compare contrast the two?
Yes.
And are there lessons for women in tech leadership in particular, and how to handle this balance that you're advocating for in the book?
Right. I mean, so it's trickier when you're a female leader because you are being judged, still by male criteria, which is the standard, but then also that you are expected to, bring some powerful feminine energy, or something about your femininity is going to bring value to the company, right? And so for Carol Bartz, she was fascinating because she had the sailor's mouth and she was swearing a lot.
It was quite amazing.
I know.
I had never been in an environment like that before.
Yeah, actually, and she swore way more than the men did, right? None of the other CEOs.
And people loved her for it.
Yes. And well, there was so much to swear about with Yahoo, actually. So she was just saying what we were all kind of feeling inside anyway. So it was refreshing that, we could swear, like she could swear about it and set that standard for us.
Right.
So she had that masculine thing, but I think it did help her connect to the men, where she was like, okay, this is a credible leader, with her style, and I found it great too. I found her really strong and powerful, but she brought this feminine, emotional aspect. So one thing that she did is that I hadn't realized until she did it is she hired a CMO as Chief Marketing Officer for Yahoo, and that Yahoo hadn't had one for several years. And I actually didn't notice that when I was there, but it was like, okay, this is a void, that we had. And she said, I want to basically reconnect consumers with our brand and revitalize our brand and build that emotional
So
connection.
that's where that came from.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so she worked with the CMO, and they made TV commercials for Yahoo to try to revitalize the brand. And so I liked that she, you know, brought that emotional aspect to it, where she wanted people to really love the site. And she also advocated like that there was some very low quality ads on the site, like for yellow teeth and cellulite, and she was just like,
I
you know,
remember those.
yeah, she's like, oh, I'm so embarrassed by these, you know, whatever expletives she used. But and then she had all of us in the audience at an all hands vote if we felt embarrassed too, and like almost every single person raised their hand, and that was enough for her. She didn't care that we would lose the profit of not showing those. She just said, we want to feel great about the kind of content we show, and so she just cared how we felt as employees, which was very refreshing. And as opposed to doing a deep cost benefit analysis or whatever, some analytic solution. So she did work that way, you know, where she just made decisions based on emotion sometimes. And Marissa Meyer, extremely analytic. But like, you know, so that was a very powerful masculine energy she brought, but maybe had less empathy, you know, lower on the empathy scale, even in the male leaders. And so, but she also had this artistry about her, like a technical artistry, where she was the first CEO to really sit down, and she did a deep dive in every department, you know, just hands-on.
So hands-on. That was legendary.
Yes, but just like, how are all these pieces working together? And like, nobody really everything had been separate for so many years, and she really was like, how are all the pieces working together? So I really was glad she did that. I really respected that she did that, and I think of that as a more feminine kind of way of approaching things.
Right,
and so for female leaders, it's tough because you have this double standard that you're literally doing. Like, I was judging these female CEOs myself as a female, right? And I'm like, I'm judging them and adding to their burden, right? But it's just natural, it happens. So you're being judged by both sides. So you have this fine line to walk, and the way you speak to men and speak to women, the language is different. So you have to go back and forth and know when to look at each one, and then also assess yourself, like, and say, look, on this qualitative scale, where do I fall? What are my feminine, you know, like, I guess, assets and the masculine ones, and how can I use those to achieve my strategy, you know, and leverage them? And so women need to do this, you know, and just really understand, like, okay, I think men will, you know, respond more when I do this, or women on that, and just play with that, right? Yeah.
And again, I heard in your story about Carol Bartz, again, which is, she had a vision, which is, we're going to establish our values, and we're going to center ourselves on those values, and we're going to be true to those values,
yes,
right?
And I love that.
And that's the starting point.
Yeah, and I felt maybe the best when she was the CEO. I mean, that's when I actually started, like, wearing makeup and dresses and things like that, you know, where I was like, oh, I can just be me now, instead of, like, having to be one of the guys. So I actually felt like, wow, I can just be more myself, which always makes you a better employee. Of
course.
Right? So I just, I think it was happiest when she was in charge.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So there's also this concept of yin and yang that gets at this as well, and you talk about that in the book. And again, it blew me away that you didn't just talk about it in terms of people, you talked about it in terms of regions.
Right.
So Silicon Valley represented one. I think, was Silicon Valley the yin?
Yeah. Silicon Valley is the yang.
Oh, sorry, the yang. I always get the two mixed up. Silicon Valley, the yang, and then the behind, you know, to the west or southwest, however you want to describe it, you have the Santa Cruz Mountains, which are the yin.
Yes.
So, again, could you just describe a little bit about how you came up with that concept and why it's important, and whether you think that, how do we implement that in practice? Because we don't want, or I don't think we want, everybody in Silicon Valley to move to Santa Cruz to experience the other side of this coin,
right. Yeah, so it's like, I don't know, like one day I was just looking at a map, and I mean, it's almost like this area, it's almost shaped like a yin-yang, like, there's a peninsula, and it's just surrounded by water on three sides, and then right down the middle is the San Andreas Fault, where we have the earthquakes, and so we have a set of mountains there. So there's this geographic divide right down there, and then to the east, is like all the tech companies, and it's like Apple's there, Facebook, everything is there, in just one cluster. And then on the west side is like these redwood forests and the ocean and just, really much less development, much less access. Like the cell phone reception's terrible. Like you're so close to Silicon Valley, but a lot of people like don't even get cell phone reception. Like it's just kind of like a different world, and you're like, wow, how can it be like they're right next to each other? Like.
That's amazing, right?
Yeah, it is amazing how separate they remained. And then I ended up moving to the other side when I felt too stressed out by the yang side. I moved to the yin side, which is when I started seeing how different they were. And for me, that was a solution that helped me balance my life, but yeah, what you're saying, like if we just opened the floodgates, like all that would happen is like they would chop down a lot of the trees and, like develop it and, so what came up for me, because you asked the question, actually, it really hadn't come up for me before that, but in the yin and yang sign, there's a dot in each side of the energy from the other side, that you can't really be so separate that there's, you're totally masculine. There's going to always be some feminine, and you can't be totally feminine. There's some masculine. And so it's up to us to manage those dots very consciously. So for example, like with the Silicon Valley side, I had this idea that, maybe the data scientists who are building algorithms can do a retreat in the redwoods, and there's a wonderful wellness center there with dormitories and everything that exists, and they can just go there and stay 3 or 4 days and be with the trees and learn from the trees and bring that back and put that in their algorithms, so bring a little bit of that side over, and then the people from the ocean side can go to Silicon Valley and learn some of those feedback loops and techniques we use in data just to get things accelerated. So if they're trying to do a wonderful cause for saving the ocean, they can reach more people, they can achieve their goals faster, and use some of those wonderful masculine techniques to help them achieve their goals. There's wonderful things in Silicon Valley that everyone can learn. It's not just a toxic place. Like it has wonderful tools for all of us to get closer to joy. So I think like managing those dots, I think will really help both sides do better. Yeah.
I like that. I like that a lot. And so this is a good segue now to wrap this up with talking about how all of this matters for our mental health. So, soon after COVID-19 pandemic began, you participated in group therapy after being diagnosed with what you called adjustment disorder, also known as situational disorder. You discussed this in the book. And you described it as a maladaptive, I had to put this down so I could get it straight. You described it as a maladaptive response to a psychological stressor. I mean, that sounds like serious stuff. You actually, in the book, you sounded relieved to get that diagnosis. And I'm wondering whether you recommend that anyone feeling out of sync with themselves or their environment seek out potential mental health diagnoses. And what if they do not have the resources at work like you were able to access?
Yeah, so for me, getting a diagnosis was great because otherwise you're like drowning in the possibilities, or like there's just something wrong with you as a person or something. And once you can have a name to what it is, then you can actually start to manage it and make it better. Like once you identify it, it takes off this whole layer of that uncertainty, or I don't know.
Now you have a model again for interpreting the data that you're getting from your own sense of the world. Right?
Yeah, and you also know what to expect. Like, okay, it's not going to get better overnight, but here are the things that can make it better. So you feel like there's something you can do about it as well, right? So I recommend for people, like if you ever are starting to feel like, hey, is there something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with you, and you're like, I don't know what it is, and I just can't function and do things like I used to do. I'm really having, like for me, I just couldn't even do my dishes. Like it was just so hard to do a dish. Like I just couldn't do it, and I'm like, okay, there's obviously something wrong. So I recommend that you seek that professional mental health support. And so so in that case, I had the employee assistance program where I worked. But if you don't, you could try calling your medical insurance provider, because some medical insurance does cover mental health services. If they don't do that, then you can also try, like there are some providers and wellness centers that are on a sliding scale, so you can Google that and explore something.
Yep.
But then what also came up for me several years ago, at a time when I didn't have any other kind of coverage, I tried BetterHelp, and it's an online therapy platform, and it's a cheaper alternative than going to a therapist. But what happened is, like, afterwards, like a few years later, there was a class action lawsuit against BetterHelp because they were selling the email address and your mental health question answers to Facebook and Snapchat and other social media platforms in order to do advertising, and they didn't disclose that they were doing that. Okay, so
that was the allegation.
Yeah, that was the allegation.
Okay.
And so the lawsuit, I was awarded, less than $10 for having my privacy violated. And so now at least they do make it transparent that they're doing that, so you can opt out of it if you want.
Okay.
But so it's another option, but you just have to be aware of, like, the fine print on that. I mean, when you're in a depression, like, you don't have the energy to research that kind of stuff.
Right.
So you may need to ask a trusted friend or a person to help you with something like that, you know? So it's good in your head to always line up, like, who in my life can I reach out to, like, if I have a mental health problem that isn't going to judge me and can maybe help me, just find the right person to help me.
Sure.
Because you don't have the energy, that's the problem. Yeah.
So in the book, you described a group therapy session where the therapist recommended that you don't tell your employer, or was it your employer or future employers?
Yeah, your employer.
Your employer, that you were a part of this.
Right.
And I read that, and I'm thinking, well, why did you include it in the book? The therapist gave you that recommendation not to tell your employer. Now it's in black and white. So I'm curious why you decided to go ahead and include it in the book. Yeah.
So the way I wrote the book, so believe it or not, I had no idea what I was actually going to write when I sat down. It was 100% intuitively guided, like every single thing that I chose to put in or not put in was intuitively guided, and it came to that point of like, hey, you're going to put this in the book, So my logical mind raised some concerns, like, hey, I thought we looked,
Now is the logical the yin or the yang?
Yeah, that's the yang. Yeah, that's the side of the employer, right? So my logical mind was like, hey, they told us not to do this, but then, when I really sat with it and I said, okay, what got me partly into the mental health problem or kept me there was that I was isolated, that I wasn't speaking, right? And that isolation just makes these things worse, honestly. Yeah. And so I felt like, okay, it's safe to put it in this book. And also that, because starting in chapter 2 of the book, there were some very unconventional things. And I'm like, anyone who's going to be judgmental about group therapy would not have gotten past chapter 2. And so they'll never read it anyway, right?
Right,
so,
and we're talking about this towards the end of the interview.
So
So
they'll never make it to this point. So they don't know. They don't even know that it happened, right? So if you cared, then you made it this far, right?
Right.
So that's it. So it's safe. It's kind of safe.
Yeah. And I applaud you for including that too. I'm sure it's going to help a lot of people. Another reason why I wanted to make sure that we did this discussion. So let's conclude with the redwood tree.
Okay.
One of the most, of all the fascinating things in your book, one of the most fascinating things.
Yes.
Now again, you have to read the book to get the full rich texture of this relationship that Phylis had with the redwood tree.
Yes.
And I tried to get the redwood tree here for the interview, but it didn't quite work. It couldn't come here, and we couldn't quite go over there, too cold.
Right.
But we decided to do this environment as kind of symbolic, right?
Yes.
Of this moment in your life where you really found. Well, I'll let you just describe it for readers, because I can't do it justice with my own language.
Okay. So this happened when I was at Yahoo. But so much happened at Yahoo. But so this happened when I was at Yahoo, and I had a lot of stuff going on. There was the complications at work. But there was also like, I had just like gotten out of a relationship that now I look back and this person was a narcissist, so that was that problem. And then I was diagnosed with breast cancer as well. So there's just so many different things in my life that weren't working out all at the same time. And I, at that point, I had just moved to the coast, and it's like maybe my body knew like this was all going to come up. And so I said, okay, let me just go for a hike. And I went into the redwood forest, and I don't know, I had this experience and it was an energetic experience with this redwood tree. And I describe it in the book. I won't go into a lot of detail here, but it was this experience where it was like, this tree basically like connected with me and was just like, everything's going to be okay. This is all going to be all right. This is just basically just a one line item in your life, and all of this stuff, right? And somehow I felt so relaxed after that, and like just almost like high. I almost felt like I was just high, and it lasted for a number of days, and I felt like I'm in love or I'm high or something like that, and then, and I was just like all excited about it, and I was like, oh my God, why don't I just go back to the tree, like since I feel so great, like duh, right? So then I went back to the tree, and it happened one more time, this kind of like experience, and but then after that, it never happened again. I had the surgery for the cancer, and then somehow I never had that level of experience with the tree. But I was like, let me just go back to this tree, and it helped me, and maybe I can exchange some knowledge with it, and the things it doesn't know about because it's stuck in this one spot, and I get to go around everywhere, and so I can tell it certain things, and it can teach me certain things. And so I started interacting with this tree, and maybe one of the most important things, or a few of them, is that first of all, when it's a tree, like you're guaranteed, like you can spill your secrets and guts, and it's not going to tell anyone, right? It's a judgment-free zone. You can say anything you want; it's not going to get out. But this tree, because it operates on such a different sense of time, it's really slow, and when you're overwhelmed and you have a mental health problem, you move slower. Like, you can't help it. You can't go at the frenetic pace that's at work and stuff. So being in this pace where it was so slow, like, it actually felt just right to me.
Okay.
And then that's where I felt like that very lightness of being, because I wasn't struggling to keep up with what's going on at work and all of these different things, right? So it's like I'm just literally able to be exactly what's coming naturally to me. And it was the same wavelength as this tree, and I think that's why we could connect, because I was so slow, and this tree was there to say, like, it's okay to be slow. And then it turned into like, well, this isn't about slow, this is about timelessness, and then you start really tapping into the wisdom, and all the crud, goes away, and then the truth comes to you, right? So I think that part of like having that truly, like, this is a safe space, that, it's a really natural dynamic, and you can really find a peace, and go at your own pace and learn about yourself, because there's nobody around you that you're trying to impress, or or anything, right? Like, you can really be the best you can be. So that was what happened for me with this tree, and so for other people out there, you can connect with other things, like, if you don't have the forest or the ocean or something, you can connect with the sky. You can always try to connect with the sky. That's always changing. You learn something different from the sky than you would from the trees, but it's very dynamic and beautiful. Like, maybe there's clouds, or the moon is there, or the angle of the sun is changing throughout the year, and just so many different things to connect with and tune into. So I feel like it's accessible to anyone, to have these kind of nature connection experiences. And so I really hope that, people will go out and experiment with it and try and just see what works for them. And that's it, There's no failure with it. Like, you will learn something, even if it doesn't work for you, you've learned something, right? So you just go out and try, and then you can just discover great things about yourself and get closer to joy.
Yeah,
So.
that would be great. And maybe
Yeah.
people over time, if this video is up on YouTube or something, will put in the comments some of their experiences and
that would be
kind of
great.
help other people validate and
Yeah.
bring some confirmation to this.
Yeah.
So I tell you, after reading a book, again, so many changed me so dramatically, but in my office, I sit down in front of a window, and there's a few trees in the yard, but there's one big tree, kind of like this one here, and it goes through its cycles. It sheds. It's like right now it's shedding leaves, and I kid you not, ever since reading your book, I think about that tree a little differently. I realized, particularly after the pandemic, when I've been working from home since the
Right.
pandemic. I realized, you know what? I haven't quite gotten to the level of consciousness about it that you have. But I actually developed a relationship with this tree. It like centers my workday. Like it's always
great.
there every
Yeah.
time I sit down in the morning, there's the tree. Now maybe in different seasons,
Right.
but it's there.
Oh my
I don't
God.
talk to the tree
Right,
or
right,
anything.
right.
But it is there, and I started looking and thinking about it much differently after reading your book.
Oh,
so
great.
I'm still working through that one to
Okay,
see
yeah.
where it goes.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we'll see. So Phylis, this has been fantastic. Again, I want to encourage everyone to buy and read this book, Data for Joy, Restoring Balance in the Age of Algorithms. I hope this discussion has been motivating and has inspired you to check out this book. We could only touch the very, bare
Right.
surface of the lessons and wisdom that come in this book. Trust me, it's changed the way I look at so many different things, and I'm sure it's going to do a lot for you. Any last words that you want to give to the audience here before we...
I don't know. Well, if you made it this far, thank you for listening. Bless you for listening. I think, we're entering this age of the world where, we all just have to start becoming more conscious of what makes ourselves tick and what, brings us joy, and so data is for everyone. It's playful, it can be fun, and just jump in and start playing, and see what comes up for you. So have a great time.
All right. Thank you, Phylis.
Yeah, thank you so much, Duru, for having me. And this has been so special. So this is one thing where to connect with coworkers and bosses and things like this in a new way has been phenomenal. So I also do encourage you, if you do have a story to share about yourself,
Yes.
don't be afraid to put it out there, because that's how you find your connections. You have to speak up. So it's an important lesson that I learned through
Yeah.
this process. Yeah.
Yeah, so important.
Yeah, it's great. So thank you, Duru.
All right. Thanks, Phylis. Thank everyone
right.
for checking us out. Data for Joy.
Bye-bye.